Episode 1 of The One begins with the skeletal remains of a body being found in the Thames. It's a big find, but one that's overshadowed by a brand new dating app being launched. Matched by DNA and genetically guaranteed to find your true love, co-creator and CEO Rebecca pitches her story as the audience oohs and ahs at her every word. Spiking divorce rates and destroyed marriages, not to mention over 10 million matches, leads the government to begin making moves against Rebecca and The One. Investor Damien catches wind of this and tells Rebecca to figure it out before it damages their stock. After all, if the government restrict the use of DNA, it would put the entire app in jeopardy. Reporter Mark shows up at the company and asks about Rebecca's ex, James. As he does, we cut back 2 years earlier to see Rebecca in a bar meeting a guy called Ben. A bust-up there involving a sleazy guy sees Rebecca apologize but grow closer to him. Back in the present, officers Kate and Nick arrive on the scene and talk about the body found in the river. The examination brings up word that it's Ben, and he's apparently been dead for over a year. It's a pretty damning conclusion, but throws up big questions over exactly who did this and why. Mark heads home and spends time with his partner, Hannah. They talk about one of their close friends and how the app has destroyed them. It's an interesting passing conversation, but one that shows the danger of this app and no doubt feels like foreshadowing. Meanwhile, Rebecca meets the government MP and blackmails her, claiming she has the details regarding a DNA match for her daughter. Apparently her match is a pretty shady guy called Stefano who served time in prison. Eventually she agrees to stay in line. As we soon find out, all of this is a front, and the girl's actual match is someone far more desirable. We then cut across to Kate, who's matched up with a girl from Barcelona called Sofia. She's not exactly what she expected, but keeps an open mind. Anyway, Kate eventually puts this aside and shows up at Rebecca's house and lets her know about Ben. Rebecca keeps a level head, at least to begin with anyway. She soon takes her leave, tasking her assistant Connor with escorting the officers out the door. Well, that definitely looks suspicious, but Kate doesn't think much of it. The government MP backpedals on her idea, deciding against legislation, which leads Damien to praise Rebecca for her ruthlessness. Back at the station, the pathologist report reveals that Ben didn't initially die from drowning. It seems like his body fell, rather than being hit with a boat. This makes for an inconsistent story from Rebecca and raises a massive red flag for the officers investigating. Kate is stood up by Sofia that evening, but things take a turn for the worst when she learns the Spaniard is actually in hospital. This explains why she didn't show up at the bar that evening. Apparently it was a hit and run. Right now it's too early to know what happened. At home, Rebecca contemplates what to do regarding the Ben scandal. Eventually she decides to phone James, telling him that the police have found Ben's body. As she mentions there's going to be an investigation, she asks to meet. It's here we see brief snippets of the past, as it appears Rebecca may have had something to do with the murder. Episode 2 of The One begins with Rebecca and Connor heading down to the dock in the middle of the night. There, Rebecca meets James and tells him about the investigation. Apparently James punched Ben that night, which Rebecca follows up by mentioning a lot of blood too. It turns out Rebecca was wearing a wire this whole time, deciding to incriminate James just in case it comes down to his word vs hers. We then jump back in time again as we see Ben and Rebecca both drunk. James shows up and congratulates the pair for solving the algorithm for their upcoming DNA app. Well, Rebecca decides to work behind Ben's back. She tells James that she wants to test the science of this app by using data collected from Ben's database. Rebecca does just this, running the details through with 100,000 samples, 98% corresponded on CCDC25. Back in the present, Kate leaves Sofia at the hospital and kisses her while she's still in her comatose state. Kate heads back to work, beginning to build evidence against Rebecca. Pulling Ben's phone records brings text messages about lying and how Ben and Rebecca were due to meet that evening. Meanwhile, Hannah heads out and meets her friend Megan, agreeing to go for dinner that night. However, Hannah's friend Lucy shows and awkwardness ensues. In private, Hannah explains that Megan is actually Mark's match after she stole his hair and decided to do a DNA test. She was curious over who Mark's match was and intentionally got in touch with the girl. Meanwhile, Mark is encouraged to talk to Rebecca in her car. She propositions him, claiming she can help with his career by feeding big scoops. If he does this, it could be a big boost for his career. If he fails, well, he won't even be able to sell the big issue anymore. No pressure then. James heads over to meet Ben's partner, Amy, and learns some crucial details about the past. It turns out Rebecca bought the house for the pair, and she had nothing but praise for Ben, including how she wouldn't have been able to make the company without him. Back in the present, Rebecca prepares to face the press. With cameras clicking and reporters desperate to speak to the founder, Rebecca silently heads off in her car. While she does, Kate checks the news and notices news spreading surrounding Ben's body being found. It's gone viral, with it very likely being Mark's doing. Nick and Kate both show up at the office, noticing the man with the placard is back. They both head in to speak to Rebecca, but her press liaison refuses to let them see her. On top of that, they're also threatening legal action on the back of the leak. As Kate leaves, she mentions Ben's text messages, which certainly unnerves Rebecca. Hannah heads over to Megan's for dinner, asking her about love and relationships. She mentions who her ideal man is and leaves the room momentarily, allowing Hannah to do some snooping. At the hospital, Kate heads back and learns that Sophia has a wife, a girl called Valeria. She's clearly shook up and eventually admits that they were matched together using the app. In Spanish, an enraged Valeria forces her out, as Kate is beside herself with shock. In the past, Rebecca meets James, who admits that he's put her DNA in the algorithm, and it's come back with a match. Specifically, it's brought up a guy from Facebook, whom he shows her. When Ben leaves the house though, he notices the pair sitting in the car together and begins to suspect the worst. In fact, Rebecca goes one step further on this journey and flies out to Tenerife to meet her match, Matthias. They talk at the beach bar together and they immediately start flirting. That flirting eventually leads to kissing, as Rebecca excitedly feeds back to James that the app is a success. Only, if this is her match, then it means that the man from the start of episode 1 is a fraud. What happened to Matthias? And is the app actually as foolproof as it? Episode 3 of The One begins 18 months ago in Tenerife. Rebecca meets Fabio, Matthias's brother, for the first time. He teases his sibling, who eventually encourages Fabio to leave, while he sits with our future CEO. As the two grow closer together, James starts to exhibit some concerns, especially when he learns Matthias confessed that he loves her. With the pair packing up to return home, Rebecca is torn over what to do. As they spend more time together, Rebecca suggests Matthias come back to London with her. She even invites Fabio too. Matthias brings this idea to Fabio, but he's not exactly thrilled with the idea. In fact, Fabio outright tells him he's not going. This forces Matthias's hand too, as he decides to stay in Tenerife. In the present, Rebecca learns that Damien is scheming behind her back, courtesy of his current girlfriend, Holly. Damien wants to replace Rebecca on the board, and he'll make his move soon. In order to leverage her position, Rebecca decides to use Holly to get her to use again Damien. After, she confronts Charlotte at work, the investor he's conspiring with, and confronts her about the coup. She refuses to submit, instead leading Rebecca into blackmailing her to force a submission. Kate digs into the media leak and realizes there are key details there that don't match their police records. On the back of this, she realizes Rebecca self-sabotaged herself to make the police back off. Well, the pair immediately head off and visit James next. He remains nonchalant around Ben and Rebecca's friendship, claiming they weren't having sex or particularly close. The evening of Ben's death they were at a party together. Kate brings up the text about lying, and this immediately riles James up. He's shifty, staring off to the right, as Nick realizes he's deceiving them and calls him out for it. James decides to call his lawyer, encouraging both officers to leave. Back at home, Kate talks to her flatmate about the lies Sophia has told. Kate admits that she loves her, deciding to go to the hospital and see who Sophia will choose. Meanwhile, Mark organizes a surprise birthday party for Hannah and invites Megan along. He takes her number from Hannah's phone and enthusiastically encourages her to show up that evening. Mark arrives at the pub with Hannah first as the party celebrations get underway. Hannah is happy until Megan shows up. Awkwardness immediately ensues as Hannah starts to panic. She believes that Megan is going to fall for Mark now they've met, while Lucy takes Hannah aside and encourages her to stop talking to Megan and break off their friendship. Back inside, Hannah plays up the sickness angle as Mark and Megan say goodbye to each other. Only, their stares linger as they both leave. There's definitely something there between them. Kate heads back to the station and finds CCTV footage from Ben's apartment block. They notice two guys, Matthias and Fabio, showing up to talk. The timing of this coincides with Rebecca too, whom we see was wearing the bloodied shirt at the time this pair came knocking. Rebecca was outside in her car with James and encouraged him to switch clothes with her. Handing over a bag of clothes and evidence incriminating her, she tasked James with destroying everything. Only, he decided to keep the shirt as collateral. Well, that certainly comes in handy during the present, as James warns Rebecca off, sending a picture of the bloodied shirt and telling her not to mess with him. This brings Connor and Rebecca to his place. They blindside him, with Connor beating the guy down while Rebecca is sat waiting. He refuses to tell them where the t-shirt is, prompting Rebecca to order Connor to shoot him in the knee. Connor refuses to do so though, and lets the guy go. Meanwhile, Kate visits Sophia at hospital and learns more about her past through Valeria. It turns out Sophia lied about her family. As Kate heads in to check up on her, she notices her mobile in the top drawer. Kate takes it and notices a missed call from a guy called Sebastian. Using Sophia's thumbprint, she phones Sebastian back, finding out that he's actually her. Episode 4 of The One begins 12 months prior to our current timeline. Rebecca stops her car in the middle of London and marvels at a big billboard advertising The One. She smiles, heading back to track the numbers on her computer. Only, this comes at a cost. Ben shows up and reveals that he's currently being investigated for a data breach. He's been doing his work on a public Wi-Fi network and believes this may have attributed to him being hacked. James and Rebecca contemplate what to do about this, but ruthless Rebecca decides to let him take the blame for everything. Even worse, she doesn't even feel remorseful for what follows as Ben loses his job. Rebecca continues to march on with her success. Back in the present, Valeria and Kate head into hospital where Sophia's brother and father are sat checking up on her. Together, they break the news about Sophia's complicated love triangle. Speaking of triangles, Hannah does her best to try and blank Megan too, rejecting her calls as Mark jokes about the pair being romantically involved. Meanwhile, Rebecca hosts Ben's service where both Kate and Nick show up to pay their respects. It's obviously more than that though, as Kate keeps a watchful eye on Rebecca. She confronts the CEO in the toilets too, questioning why she leaked the news to the media. Rebecca changes the subject, mentioning Sophia and her coma instead. Kate next turns her attention to Ben's wife Amy, bringing up Rebecca and how she's hiding behind her lawyers. Kate prods the hornet's nest hard, sending this angry woman buzzing over to Rebecca, ready to sting. Amy confronts her in front of everyone and asks outright exactly what happened to Ben. The murmurs in the room turn awkwardly silent as Rebecca eventually walks away, refusing to say anything. Instead, she visits Fabio and Matthias who happen to be in London. There's clearly no love lost there. Fabio immediately leaves when he sees her, while Matthias brings up Tenerife and their time together. Apparently he came looking for her after a speech online. Her words really struck a chord with him, given they echoed his exact feelings toward her. Unfortunately, Rebecca is still haunted by memories of Ben, including him being pushed off the roof and then subsequently into the water some time later. After sleeping with Matthias, she tells her match that he needs to leave and keep up the pretense of lying. She wants to make sure nothing comes back against her, and that includes him going back to Tenerife. Megan blindsides Hannah after she leaves work and quizzes her over why she's been avoiding her. Eventually Hannah comes up with a pretty ludicrous and hilarious excuse, claiming she doesn't like how she gets changed at yoga. This inevitably brings her to Mark, admitting that she's really confused and wanting to know what's going on with Hannah. Mark shows up and the two trade stories too, realizing that Hannah has lied to them both. Mark is clearly torn over what to do and eventually leaves. Well, back home he speaks to Hannah, questioning her over the story she's concocted. Hannah sounds pretty crazy to be honest, and believes Megan is trying to break them up. Mark knows there's something going on and admits that he's scared. Hannah eventually breaks the news that Megan is his match as the two sit in stunned silence. Mark feels betrayed, in fact he's outright furious that she's done this behind his back. Unable to take Hannah's lies, he decides to sleep on the sofa. Kate heads out with Sebastian next and talks about Sophia. It turns out they haven't seen her for 4 years. Sophia's past is pretty dark too, with her mother dying while Sophia was in the car with her. On the back of this, Sophia's father started drinking heavily, but the hazy details following this cause a bit of a red flag for Kate, as she wonders quite what to do next. Rebecca makes her move and sends a sex tape of Kate out to the whole office. Kate knows this is the work of the CEO and braves the comments at work before heading back to the hospital. Meanwhile, Fabio phones Rebecca and gives her a taste of her own medicine. He's going to blackmail her, telling the boss that Ben revealed everything, and he's ready to leak that to the Episode 5 of The One begins with Connor arriving at Fabio's door. He leads the Portuguese man downstairs, where he sits with Rebecca to talk business. Matthias doesn't know about this meeting either, as Fabio taunts her about Ben and how unhappy he was learning about the app and the match. He asks for €2 million to keep quiet, including 20,000 in cash. Connor isn't sure this is a good idea, pointing out that Fabio is a junkie, but Rebecca pays him off nonetheless. Meanwhile, Damien shows up at James' door, but fails to find the investor. We then jump back, although it's not actually clear thanks to the editing, to see James and Rebecca pitch their idea to Damien. He decides against investing, at least to begin with, as Rebecca blindsides him after he's finished work. It's here she asks to take his DNA, and admits that she too has been matched up using this app. Based on her word, he decides she should call in the morning to reconsider the investment. In the present, James and Damien talk. Damien believes that Rebecca is involved in Ben's death and wants his help to usurp her from the CEO position at the company. Damien also hands over evidence showing that Rebecca had every intention of screwing him over. This includes watering down his shares and taking away his voting rights. Damien admits that she was never his friend, even way back when this all began. Hannah wakens after her fight with Mark, but finds him gone in the morning. He's still mad, rejecting her calls and instead meeting Megan. He breaks the news to her that they're a match, eventually laughing and spontaneously kissing out in the rain. Mark pulls away when he realizes what he's done and apologizes. He eventually heads back home and admits to Hannah that he met Megan and told her the truth about the match. The pair do eventually have sex, but Mark struggles to get Megan out of his mind. Connor shows up and drops off the cash for Fabio, messaging Rebecca to let her know that the deal has been completed. Well, that evening Fabio rings, but all she can hear is breathing. Naturally, Rebecca decides to break into his apartment to check on him. She finds Fabio passed out on the bed and convinces Connor against helping him. She lets him die right there, although we don't actually see the scene play out. Elsewhere, Sophia regains consciousness as Kate shows up to see her. Despite only knowing each other for a tiny fraction of time, they kiss as Kate admits that Valeria is there, along with her family too. Sophia's face drops. She pleads with Kate not to let her family see her, which Kate relays onto them. She doesn't know the full story here, though, but implores them not to show up. After this visit, Kate and Nick show up at the rooftop, where Ben fell to his doom. The pair look around, eventually noticing that the building is close to a canal, which they believe is where the body may have been dumped. From here, it could have drifted downstream. Well, the investigation is cut short again by Kate heading back to see Sophia. She admits she knows about the past, but Sophia is cagey about the specifics and refuses to open up. Instead, she asks Kate to lie down on the bed with her. We then jump across to Damien, who tells Rebecca she needs to resign. If she doesn't, then she'll be kicked out the company via unanimous vote. Given he has James and his influential voice, Rebecca is put in a difficult position. That position is made worse, though, when Matthias suddenly shows up unannounced at Rebecca's place. He asks about Fabio, who's not answering his phone, but Rebecca lies and claims she hasn't heard. Episode 6 of The One begins with the police arriving at James' house and arresting him for the murder of Ben. He claims to have evidence to prove otherwise, including Rebecca's shirt, which certainly piques Nick's interest. Nick stops by James' office and bags up the bloodied shirt, taking it as evidence after taking it from the safe. Nick lets him go from his handcuffs and encourages him to phone a lawyer. Rebecca and Matthias continue to spend time together while he worries about his brother's absence. Rebecca begins to crack, though, telling Connor that she needs him around, despite telling Matthias several episodes ago to leave. She tasks Connor with keeping the Fabio situation under wraps before the pair leave. Rebecca and Connor eventually blindside James at his office, with the former admitting that she's found a match for James using his DNA. She's even brought her across to the UK as a gift for her. Her name is Yasmin, and she's currently working in the company's IT department too. Rebecca outright admits that she's manipulating him, but also claims she wants him to be happy too. Speaking of happiness, Hannah and Mark continue to see less of it together, as they fail to see eye to eye over the Megan situation. Eventually Mark meets Rebecca again, whom he continues to work with. She drops off an envelope full of documents for him and heads back to see Matthias. At the hospital, Kate catches up with Sophia after Valeria decides to head home and leave them in peace. Sebastian doesn't know why Sophia won't talk to him, and Sophia doesn't help either, refusing to acknowledge or talk about the past. Kate knows there's something being hidden there, but quite what remains to be seen. At work, Rebecca sits in and watches as the board vote on whether to keep her on as CEO or not. The vote is split and it comes down to James for the decider. He decides to keep Rebecca on as the CEO, which prompts Damien to concede and pull his investment out the company. In the parking lot, news leaks about Damien's escorts. This, of course, happens to be Mark's doing. As Mark heads back home, though, stalker Megan happens to be waiting for him. She admits that it's hard for her to walk away from this, and that her feelings are growing for him. Are they growing just because of what he told her, or is this genuine? Kate and Nick head back on the investigative hunt again, this time leading them to Ben's ex-employers. There, the duo find out about Ben's past issues and the hack that got him fired. This also brings up Matthias's name too, with news that Ben actually contacted this firm to do a check on Matthias's background. This brings Kate and Nick up to scratch as Nick phones HQ and has them put a red flag on the brothers. Word of this gets back to Rebecca, who warns Matthias and tells him he needs to leave again. Connor keeps him hidden in a safe house, promising to bring Matthias some shopping soon. Kate invites Sebastian over to her house, and the two have dinner together. While drinking wine, Sebastian shows her a picture of the siblings together and encourages her to keep hold of it. When Kate leaves the room, Sebastian struggles to compose himself. When Kate returns, he admits that he has feelings for her. The two naturally start kissing, but Kate's phone rings. Fabio's body has shown up at the morgue. She phones through to Matthias and breaks the bad news. Episode 7 of The One begins with rain slamming against Rebecca's car as she heeds Connor's advice and heads in to see Matthias. With news of Fabio's death breaking, she sits with him and apologizes. Hugging her lover, she tells Matthias that he was a good brother. Meanwhile, Sophia discharges herself from hospital and is nowhere to be found. Kate is confused, struggling to find where her lover is. Sebastian hasn't seen her either, and as we soon find out, she's decided to distance herself from everyone. Kate eventually catches up with Matthias just after he's identified Fabio's body. She asks some questions about Fabio, specifically why he was in London. Matthias confirms that Fabio's phone is gone, leading Kate to turn her attention toward Ben again. She asks what they spoke about that evening, but he refuses to comment without a lawyer present. Just before Kate leaves, she encourages him to talk to Rebecca, which is exactly what he does. Kate follows in close pursuit. Outside in the open, Kate watches from afar as Matthias and Rebecca embrace each other warmly. Matthias admits he hasn't said anything to Kate, as Rebecca spots Kate out the corner of her eye. Rebecca reveals to him that she's being blamed for Ben's murder and encourages Matthias to get in the car with her. When they drive off, Kate heads back to the station and checks out Fabio's phone records. She suspects there's something going on there and starts to dig deeper. This brings Kate back to the traditional British weather, pouring rain, as Sebastian waits outside her house for her. He hasn't heard from Sophia and admits he doesn't want to feel this way about Kate. It's here he reveals that he really cares about her. In exchange, Kate tells him she feels nothing. As she shuts the door on her, she closes her eyes, trying to make sense of her emotions. Kate eventually does track down Sophia and sits with her, bringing up the situation of her family again. This time though, Sophia admits the truth. She was the one who grabbed the steering wheel that fateful day and caused the accident that took the life of her mother. She blames herself, weeping in Kate's arms. Mark meets Hannah and confirms his biopsy results came back negative. He admits that the one person who's been there for him all this time has been her, and he wants Hannah to come home again. He lies too, claiming he hasn't seen Megan, but admitting he wants things to return to how they were before. After sleeping with Hannah, Mark heads off to see Megan and tells her to distance herself from them. He apologizes for her being wrapped up in all this and eventually ends up sleeping with her in the toilets again. Come on, Mark, pull yourself together, man. In the morning, Kate heads over to see Damien, continuing the investigation. He mentions her being the first person to be matched by the algorithm and that the publicity surrounding her and Ethan has been used to mask this fact. As we already know all this, the one is literally just recycling plot points we were already familiar with. Finally we get to the good stuff though, as Kate receives Fabio's phone logs. One of the key numbers happens to be Rebecca's, which gets Kate thinking. Kate eventually follows her into an award ceremony, watching on the CCTV as she accepts an award, before breaking off from Ethan backstage and heading off in different directions. It's here Kate realizes that Rebecca has been lying to everyone, including how her and Ethan are not matched. Rebecca refuses to indulge her, eventually walking away after bringing up the sex video fiasco. This conflict is far from Episode 8 of The One begins with Rebecca taking to the stage and giving a statement. With everyone watching, she reveals they're going to float the company on the stock market. After that, she's going to sell her stocks and spend the rest of her life with her true love. Despite fighting all this time to stay in power, she's now going to turn it all in for Matthias. This looks set to take a turbulent turn, though when Kate meets Matthias and shows him Fabio's call logs, Kate reveals that she knows he's Rebecca's real match. This prompts Matthias to open up about Fabio's drug addiction and how Fabio floated the idea to him surrounding blackmailing Rebecca. Matthias, however, had no part in this. On the back of his statement, Kate pleads with Matthias to do the right thing and record everything Rebecca says, just in case she incriminates herself. On the back of this, Sebastian heads over for dinner with Sophia, but there's clearly chemistry between him and Kate. Despite not being matched together, she can't shake the feeling that there's something there. Meanwhile, Mark messages Megan and makes his decision. He's going to stay with Hannah. She's enraged, eventually changing her Facebook status to confirm she's selling up her apartment and moving back to Australia. Hannah enthusiastically comments how great this is, as Mark forces a smile and agrees. Hannah eventually does catch up with Megan again and apologizes over how everything transpired this season. Megan eventually walks away after taking some of Hannah's hair for herself. Back home, Rebecca severs ties with Ethan and admits that she knows about his match with Luca. After discussing the future, he thanks her, but Rebecca shrugs it off, claiming she's only doing it for herself. This leads her to message Matthias and set up a meeting. Alone together, Rebecca asks Matthias for 6 months to get everything together. Matthias tells her he wants the truth and needs to be able to trust her, and now we finally find out what happened that night. Ben showed up at the party and met Rebecca down by the docks. Matthias told him all about the real match, which led Ben to figure out that Rebecca stole his database. The irony here is that, if she'd actually asked, he probably would have helped out. James showed up, eventually leading to him and Ben fighting together. Ben eventually decided to take absolutely everything for himself, prompting Rebecca to push him off the rooftop. Well, that was predictable. Rebecca covered everything up, convincing James to take him and drag the body to the river. They switched shirts, and she returned to the party like nothing happened. Back in the present, Matthias learns about Fabio and his overdose from Rebecca. Only, placard guy David Cooper suddenly shows up and looks set to stab Rebecca, but Matthias moves in line and takes the blow. Some pretty poor acting then ensues as Rebecca screams for Connor, but he doesn't show up. In fact, no one shows up, so why hasn't David tried to kill Rebecca? Why not go for another knife blow? Well, instead we don't see him again, so one would assume he's decided to sit and chill until the police arrive. On the back of this, Kate learns that there's nothing on Matthias's phone and nothing on the cloud either. This leaves them with little to go on. Rebecca is a mess after Matthias's death and pays her respects at the funeral. Kate shows too and admits that David has been arrested for his role in all this. She goes on to admit Rebecca has nothing now, who in turn bitterly threatens Kate and admits she needs to be careful. Back home, we learn the truth about the one. In actual fact, the match isn't always accurate. Rebecca admits to James that it can sometimes be thrown askew if there are siblings involved. There's a small chance there could be more than one, prompting James to incredulously exclaim and walk away. After a montage reminding us of our unresolved storylines, we see David stabbed in prison. This was Rebecca's handiwork, as she receives word that this has been done. She takes a deep breath before heading out onto stage. She greets the crowd and says, "I've got a secret I want to share with you." The theory of last episode. Well, that was underwhelming. After 7 episodes of guesswork, the situation involving Ben finishes with the most obvious and likely scenario all along. Mystery fans will almost certainly find themselves annoyed and bored to tears with the simplicity of all this, while the unresolved character angles leave the door open for a possible second season that may or may not come. The problem with the one is it's not the only one in this dating sci-fi space. Even reality shows are jumping on this now too. Unfortunately, the one just doesn't have that unique hook to keep things feeling fresh and exciting throughout. The result is a show akin to putting too much water in a glass of squash or cordial. The flavor is there, but it's weak and in desperate need of more. Whether this show will be renewed for a second season remains to be seen, but based on this showing, there really isn't anything much here to suggest it'll be picked up from middling mediocrity. Our obsession with true love is always something that dating apps and companies will jump on to try and market. From speed dating and romantic chat rooms through to the explosive success of Tinder, dating is a lucrative and constantly evolving market. So what would happen if there was an app out there that could instantly tell you with scientific precision who your true love is? Would people distrust the technology? Would it revolutionize dating? Inhibit human emotion and spontaneity? Or lead to a brand new world of romance? The possibilities are certainly endless. Despite its lucrative title, The One is not the only one to explore this concept. Last year saw both The Feed and Osmosis release with a very similar concept. AMC added their fighter to the mix too, bringing in Soulmates to mixed acclaim. And that's before even mentioning Black Mirror's excellent episode, Hang the DJ. Without even airing a single episode, The One has a pretty massive mountain to climb. Despite its best intentions, The One begins to ascend that steep ridge and immediately finds itself ill-equipped to handle the task ahead, resulting in a stumbling show that just about makes it to the peak at the end. The story here claims to be set 5 minutes in the future as a brand new dating app called The One launches to the mainstream public. Only, CEO Rebecca Webb's announcement is immediately overshadowed by damning news that a body has been found in the Thames. This body belongs to a man named Ben Naver, someone heavily involved with The One until a year ago, when he was declared missing. Of course, what ensues is a whodunit, as police try to figure out what happened to him. Alongside that are several other subplots that work to add but more depth and showcase a different side to the app, predominantly from those seeking true love or happy in their current life. Unfortunately, everything here falls into the dreaded Netflix cliffhanger trap at the end, with very little resolution to the stories we are presented. First up we have Mark and Hannah, who are happily married and seem to get along perfectly. Only, Hannah has actually conducted a match test behind Mark's back and learned who his true love is. As fate would have it, this girl happens to be living in London. So, naturally, Hannah decides to befriend this girl to figure out what she's really like. As one would expect from this setup, it completely backfires on her. Meanwhile, Detective Inspector Kate Saunders finds herself torn between her personal and professional life. Professionally, she investigates Ben's death and tries to figure out what's happened. In her personal life, though, she busies herself with a girl called Sophia, whom she happens to be matched with. All of this builds up to a rather predictable and underwhelming finale, where home truths are revealed and then left on a tantalizing cliffhanger for a second season that may or may not arrive. While it's not a bad ending per se, no spoilers here of course, it's also a very predictable one. The fact that almost everyone will figure out what happened to Ben within the first 25 minutes of episode 1 is a pretty damning sign that the murder mystery element needs some tweaking. This inevitably falls back on the sci-fi and the drama elements to prop up the show. While the latter does manage to scratch that soapy melodramatic itch, the former just leaves you more itchy. In fact, if you even think about the science and morality behind this app too much, you're bound to end up with a bit of a headache. With a DNA sample, the one claims to find a match for absolutely everyone, and as more people are added to the database, the easier that becomes. Now, given there are 7.7 billion people on this planet, and the beginning sample Rebecca uses is 100,000, the odds of actually finding a match in that minute pool is pretty remote. Of course, it's best not to think too much about the science with this one, the one certainly doesn't. Instead, the show plays out as a sort of medley of different genres, but not quite balancing them in a way that feels particularly organic. There's certainly enough to enjoy with the one, but Netflix's latest sci-fi drama just sort of seems to pop up with an indifferent shrug rather than a triumphant thump of the chest. This is certainly not the perfect match, and it's unlikely you'll swipe through for a second season.